Hey everyone, Nikki here, and today we're in the sewing studio and we're going to make an infinity scarf, which is a fairly quick and simple project, and there are literally just 2 seams to sew. Today I'm going to be using some polar fleece. It's a nice wintry blue colour, so ideal for this time of year. But fleece comes in so many different colours, and also you can get it with various patterns that are suitable for both children and adults. I wouldn't recommend making this for young children, just because it could be classed as a choking hazard for them, so please, bear that in mind. A lot of fleece is around 60 inches wide, which is 150 centimetres, give or take a centimetre or two. And then you would generally fold it selvage to selvage, so you don't have such a long strip to cut. And then cut it by double the width you want your scarf to be. And then we're going to fold it in halves, which then cuts down on the number of seams we need to sew. If you want your scarf to be double-sided, so one fabric on the front and a different one on the back, then you'd cut 2 pieces to the width you want, place them right sides together and sew along both long edges. Now, you've probably noticed, despite what I've just said, I don't have my selvage edges at the bottom, they're at the side, and that's simply because I'm using some fleece I had left over from another project and it wasn't long enough to do selvage to selvage. What's the difference? Well, the main one is the stretch of the fabric. If I grab the end here, you'll see that there's quite a lot of stretch to it, so the stretch is going across the width. There is some stretch along the other edge as well, but it's not so much. I can feel more tension when I pull it. It's not going to pull quite so much. And I have made infinity scarves with fabric that have no stretch at all, so it's not really a big issue. The only time it may be is if you're using a patterned fleece and it's directional. But as an infinity scarf by nature is twisted, then it's not going to be noticeable a lot of the time. Just in case you're sat there and you're thinking, what on earth is a selvage edge? Because not everybody is going to know. If your fabric has been cut straight off the bolt, so it's a big roll, and it's a full width of fabric, you'll have 2 edges where you'll see a couple of rows of tiny holes, and this is where the fabric was held during the manufacturing, so it would be rolled up into a big piece and it will be the selvage edge that's held it to those rollers. I do have a lot of tools and accessories that help me with my day-to-day sewing, but apart from a good pair of scissors, we really don't need anything too complicated to cut out our infinity scarves. A tape measure or a ruler is obviously very handy, so that you can place it along the edge and then move it down the fabric to make some marks and use them as your guide to cut out the length. If you're going to be cutting out a lot of them, you could grab a wooden batten or something similar, and again, grab your tape measure and add some markings along it. As this batten is painted, it will be difficult to write on it, but one thing a lot of us have in our sewing stash is painter's tape or masking tape. So you can pop it on the batten where you need to cut. This one is rather dark, but on a lighter tape you can write the measurements on and add an arrow so you know what side of the tape you're cutting on. Then if you're going to cut some at 15 inches, you can mark it there. If you're going to cut some at 10 inches wide, then you can add another piece of tape there. And again, you can do the same for the length. So you can always go and grab things from your DIY stash and see what you can make use there. Now, I'm not going to have you watch me cut it out. I think you can pretty much work that out yourselves. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll be back. So I went ahead and cut out my fabric, and it measures 15 inches wide and 29.5 inches in length, which when doubled is 59 inches in total, or in metric that's 38 centimetres by 150 centimetres. Now, I did add some pins when I cut it, as fleece is one of those fabrics that likes to shift. My edges aren't the straightest, but we can sort that out when we're sewing, and I actually can still see the line that I drew on the fabric, which was my cutting guide. One thing I will recommend to keep on hand is a lint roller, as fleece can pick up little bits of fluff here and there, especially when cutting it. And now all we need to do is bring our two edges together. So I'll just fold this over and try and make it as straight as possible along the edges. I'll pop some pins along the long edge, and I'll also again pop some down the middle section too, so it holds together whilst we're sewing it. So my fabric is folded with right sides together, and I've pinned down the long edge, probably about 2 inches apart. And I've also placed some down the centre, which again can help stop the layers from shifting whilst we're sewing. I've also popped a couple of pins across the top, and I've done the same at the bottom. You just want to make sure that the pin closest to the edge is far enough in so your presser foot won't hit it. If you're doing a double-sided fleece, then you would obviously have a seam going down both of the long edges, and if you have enough pins, I would pin both edges at the same time. And now I'll go over to the sewing machine, and with 1/2 inch seam allowance, we'll sew right from the top all the way down to the bottom. I will do a video going over the machine that I use and what features help me the most as somebody who is disabled. But I will go over some key points today that can help you sew your infinity scarf, especially if you are a new sewer. Today I will be using the stop-start button on the machine instead of the foot pedal. This does mean, unfortunately, there will be occasions when my hands will get in the way more than they would usually, but for somebody like myself, this button is a big help. As you will usually see on a sewing machine, there is a guide that you can line up your fabric along, depending on the seam allowance you're using. Now, I'm not very good at following it. If I do use it, then I will often place some painter's tape along the guideline, just so it's clearer for me to see. Instead, I'm going to use another feature of my machine, and I'm going to move my needle into position and then line up the fabric with the edge of the presser foot. An easy way to get the needle in the right position is to take a piece of card or paper, and I've drawn a line that's 1/2 inch away from the edge, and then all I have to do is move my needle over so it lines up with that line. Even though fleece does have some stretch to it, I am today going to be using the straight stitch on my machine, and I've got it set to 2.5mm in length. If you are going to be sewing a lot of fabrics like fleece or perhaps satin, then a walking foot can help to feed the fabrics through more evenly. If I take this foot off for a moment, you'll see these that are called feed dogs, and their job is to move the fabric through the machine as you're sewing. What a walking foot does is basically act like feed dogs on top of the fabric, so your top and bottom layers are moving through the machine together at a more even speed. Machines don't often come with them, and prices can vary depending on the make and model of your machine, especially if you buy a branded one. I do have a non-branded one as well as a spare, and I really don't find much difference between the two. As I put my layers under the presser foot, I haven't put it right up to the edge of the fabric. It's about 1/2 inch away from the edge. And I do this with most things I'm sewing, because often you'll find you'll start sewing and the fabric will bunch up, or the feed dogs don't grab it enough to pull the fabric through. So if you actually start a little way in and back stitch and then come forward again, that can help. I'll speed up the video whilst I go ahead and sew straight down this side. Occasionally I might sew over a pin, but usually I do tend to remove them. Sometimes I stop the machine to do this, other times I'll do it as I'm sewing. It really just depends on how far I let the needle get close to the pin before I take it out, how far the pin is inserted into the fabric. It really is personal choice. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Sew at a speed that you're comfortable sewing at. Don't worry if you see other people zooming along down their projects. And every so often I'll just straighten up my fabric a little bit so I can try and keep as even as a 1/2 inch seam allowance as possible. If you do start to drift away from your seam allowance, don't worry. Just gently guide the fabric back so your stitching curves back smoothly with a gradual adjustment, rather than do a sharp correction, which will be more noticeable. I'll slow things down as we get near the end. I try to backstitch before I get to the very end, as sometimes the fabric can get caught. Then I'll sew forward again and then backstitch once more, so we know our end stitches are really secure. Then I'll cut my threads and we can take our scarf over to the table, ready for the next part. So I've got my two ends here, so I've folded it in half and brought the bottom up to the top, and I'm just going to mark the two outer edges, so the opposite edges to our sewn seam. And this is just a washable fabric marker that I have in my stash, but you could use anything because it's not going to be seen. And then I'm going to pop my arm in, and keeping the scarf flat, I'm going to go down and grab the bottom of the scarf, then grab it about halfway along the sewn edge and pull that bottom half up to the top where the two ends meet. Of course, I'm referring them to the top and the bottom, but there really is no difference between them. And then we can just shake it out to make sure it's nice and flat. So now we have two layers with the bottom end of the scarf inside the top end. And I'm just going to line it up so that everything's even and we have the two sewn edges opposite the two unsewn edges. And now we need to make our twist. So I'm going to take the one sewn edge on the inside and bring it over to the outer edge where I made the mark earlier. And I'm opening up the seam so it lays flat, and for now I'm just going to pop a clip on it. Then I'll straighten things out and I'll do exactly the same on the other side. But this time the mark is on the inside and the seam is on the outside. And again, lay them as flat and even as possible. And again, I'll pop on a clip. And I just like to pull it so I can make sure that nothing else has got tucked in anywhere accidentally. And then I'll grab some pins. Now I want to leave a turning gap here of about 2 inches, and I gauge it by thinking about how thick is the fabric I'm using and how much fabric do I have to pull through that hole. And to make it easy, I'm going to pop a green pin in where I'm going to start. And yes, you've guessed it, pop a red pin in where I'm going to stop. So we'll start at the green and then we'll be stitching all the way around to the red. So I'm going to go ahead and I will pop in some more pins and try and avoid any other green and red ones. And one thing to be cautious about fleece is the edges do curl, so you don't want to overpin it, but you want enough so that it's going to help to keep it flat and you don't have any edges curling in on you as you sew. One thing you could do is actually use some spray starch on the edges. But just be aware that fleece doesn't like to be ironed either. So if you are going to do that, then I would let the starch dry naturally as much as possible. Or if you do iron it or put some heat on it, then make sure you use a cloth over the top and a lower heat setting so you don't scorch it. You may have spotted that I'm also now replacing the 2 clips that I'd added to hold the seams open. I'm still going to keep those seams open, but I'm replacing the clips with pins because it will make it easier when sewing. And you've probably noticed that I've pinned on the inside rather than on the outside. And when we go back over to the machine, I'll explain why. I just want to show you a couple of different ways that you can actually sew the end section of the scarf. Now this is my machine and this section pulls off, and then you have what's called a free arm. So then you can pop over anything that you're going to stitch in the round and sew it that way, which can make life easier, but I know not every machine has that option. So if I pop my table back on, I'll show you how we're going to sew it today. You don't have to have a table, but I find it helps me personally. And then I'll go over how we're going to sew things today. So as I put my scarf down, we're going to sew from the inside rather than from the outside. So I'll pop it under my presser foot, and I've placed it so the needle is just past the pin, and then I'm going to use my needle down button, and that's now popped the needle down into the fabric so it's holding it in place instead of the pin. And although we're sewing a closed loop, we are still effectively sewing a straight line. It's just a little bit more tricky to do, as we have limited space to sew in, and the pins can sometimes get in the way. But if you try and just keep everything as flat as possible and hold back the top section, just make your way round as slowly as you want to. Again, it's not a race. Nobody's going to come along and fine you for going too fast or too slow. And again, we will backstitch at the start, and I like to go back and forth a couple of times just to add some extra strength there, so there's no chance of it coming undone when we pull the fabric through. This is the seam that we've opened up, and I want to make sure that it stays open, and it's a little bit more difficult with it being underneath because we can't see it. So I'm just going to slow down my machine as we go over that. And I'll just come up to it slowly. Just as my presser foot gets close to the pin, I'm going to raise my presser foot to make sure that nothing is bunched up underneath. My needle is still in the down position, so I can take the pin out and then slowly sew over the other side of the seam. And of course we've got a few more layers here. And then I can take out the next pin and just reposition everything, again keeping it flat against the bed in the machine, and we can speed up a bit as we move to the next pin and then work our way round. And I'm just adjusting the fabric here to bring a bit more forward. As I took that pin out, I could feel it slightly bunching underneath, so I just stopped for a minute and laid it down flat again. And if I was sewing this normally, then often I'd have something like an awl or a flat tool to hold it down in place. And of course we're now going to come up to the second side seam, which is on top. So what I do with this one is, again, as my presser foot just starts to go over the edge of it, I lift it up again to stop it from bunching. Just make sure my edges are straight and sew over that slowly. I get about halfway just before the pin, then I'll take the pin out, do a bit more rejigging, and then we can sew right up to the final red pin where we can. And again I'll do some back stitching here so we can make sure that the end stitches are really secure and there's no chance of anything coming undone. And now that's done, we can take it back over to the table and we can turn it right side out. So now that's all that's left to do is turn our scarf right way out, and what I do is I just, using my thumbs and fingers, I'm just putting some of it up around about the middle of the scarf, and then I start to push it through the hole. Fleece is a soft, pliable fabric, so it's quite easy to pull through, and obviously leaving a 2-inch turning hole makes that easier as well. Yes, it's a slightly bigger hole to sew closed, but I'm sewing closed a hole anyway, so the fact it's a little bit bigger, it doesn't really matter. And then we just pinch it and make sure it's in the middle, and then you can decide how you're going to close it. You could do it by hand, And if you do, one tip is before you take it off the machine, pull through some extra thread. It could be the top thread or the bobbin thread, and then it's already attached. You don't have to tie on any extra thread before you then hand stitch it closed. Also, if you pull out one of the folded over seam allowance edges, and this is my preferred way, and then all I'm going to do is sew straight across that on the sewing machine, and I'm going to go through both layers, because if you pull them apart and try to sew it that way, you're going to end up with a bit of a bump in it, and as this is going to lay on the neck, you do want it to be as flat as possible, but the choice is yours. So I've gone ahead and I've popped in a couple of pins, and I'm just going to go sew straight across that small section, and I've made sure that the two side seams are even at the edges. And now here we have Gloria wearing our completed scarf. Don't ask me why I've called my dressmaker's model Gloria, but it was literally the first name that came into my head when she arrived. And as you can see, it sits nice across the body, shoulder to shoulder. And then when you look at the back of it, you can see how it will keep your neck nice and warm. So it's not going to be too bulky in the sleeves or the neck area if you're wearing a thick coat. And then you can twist it up so that it's folded double around the neck. If you are wearing a really thick coat and you don't want to wear the scarf underneath it, that's ideal. And although Gloria doesn't have a head, you can pull it up over your head and it will cover your ears to keep those warm as well. And if you did it even wider, it will obviously fall further down the back of the head. And I'll show you some examples of some infinity scarves I've made from some different fabrics. So this one's made from a knit fabric, which obviously isn't as thick as the fleece, which allows it to drape in a different way, and you can wear it different styles. You could have it draping down towards the front or towards the back, whichever suits the rest of the outfit that you're wearing. And then finally we have a crinkle polyester, which again is a nice lightweight fabric. Would be ideal for summer if you're going out and you just want something to maybe cover your shoulders on a cold evening. And the nice thing about this, because it is crinkle, then you don't have to worry about it getting too wrinkled and you don't have to iron it. And with this one I also made a dress where I just basically made a large rectangle and I did some shearing across the top where you put special elastic into your bobbin and then you sew several rows for the top part, and then the bottom half just hangs nicely like a skirt. So it's an easy way to make a dress, and then you could wear your scarf if maybe it's a hot summer's day and you're in the office but you need to go to a meeting. You can just pop a jacket on with the scarf underneath so you don't get too hot. Thank you for joining me today. I hope I've given you some ideas. If you do go ahead and make an infinity scarf, be sure to pop over to my Facebook group and post a picture. I will leave a link in the description below, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.